Sometimes the greatest heartbreak is not the moment someone stops loving you, but the moment they make you believe you were never worthy of love in the first place. Soft afternoon light poured through the stained glass windows of a historic Manhattan church, scattering ribbons of color across polished wooden pews filled with smiling relatives and close friends. White roses lined the aisle. A string quartet played gentle melodies, and every detail reflected months of careful planning for what was meant to be the happiest day of Emily Carter's life. She stood before the altar wearing a beautifully tailored wedding dress that her grandmother had lovingly altered by hand. Although Emily had always been self-conscious about her plus-size figure, she had spent the entire morning reminding herself that today was about commitment rather than perfection. She took a slow breath, looked into Nathan Brooks's eyes, and waited for the words that would begin their future together. Instead, an uneasy silence settled across the sanctuary. Nathan lowered his gaze before taking a small step backward. His expression carried hesitation rather than joy, and every guest instinctively sensed that something was terribly wrong. After several uncomfortable seconds, he quietly admitted that he could not continue with the ceremony. His voice trembled as he explained that he had convinced himself he could ignore the doubts he had been carrying for months, but standing at the altar made him realize he was not ready to keep the promises marriage required. The words struck Emily with overwhelming force. Confusion spread across her face before embarrassment slowly replaced it. Whispered conversations immediately rippled through the church. A few guests exchanged sympathetic looks while others stared openly, unable to hide their curiosity. Someone quietly suggested that Nathan had changed his mind because Emily was not the woman he imagined standing beside him for the rest of his life. Another voice, meant to be discreet but carried by the silent room, remarked that appearances sometimes mattered more than people wanted to admit. Every careless whisper felt heavier than the one before it. Emily tried to hold herself together with quiet dignity, but her trembling hands revealed the heartbreak she refused to show. She looked toward familiar faces hoping someone might simply stand beside her, yet uncertainty kept nearly everyone frozen in place. Her parents sat speechless, overwhelmed by the sudden collapse of the ceremony, while several members of Nathan's family avoided eye contact altogether. Near the final row of pews, a man in a charcoal suit observed everything without interrupting. Vincent DeLuca had attended the ceremony only because he respected Emily's late grandfather, whose integrity had once left a lasting impression on him many years earlier. He had expected to quietly pay his respects and leave unnoticed. Instead, he found himself witnessing a moment no decent person should ignore. Vincent did not react with anger or dramatic gestures. He simply watched Emily struggle to remain composed while the weight of public humiliation settled around her. What captured his attention was not the broken ceremony itself, but the remarkable determination in Emily's eyes as she refused to blame anyone or answer cruelty with bitterness. She quietly thanked the minister for his kindness, gathered the edge of her dress, and prepared to leave with as much grace as she could still find. As she stepped away from the altar, the sanctuary remained painfully silent. No one realized that the quiet man standing near the back had already made a decision that would soon change the course of her life, not by rescuing her from heartbreak, but by becoming the first person that day to see her worth before asking for anything in return. Emily Carter walked through the heavy wooden doors of the church with careful steps, lifting the edge of her wedding dress so it would not catch on the stone staircase. The cool autumn air met her flushed face, but it did little to calm the storm inside her heart. Behind her, the muffled voices of confused guests drifted through the open doorway as reporters from a nearby wedding magazine, believing something extraordinary had happened, quietly raised their cameras before realizing the ceremony had come to an abrupt end. Emily lowered her head and continued toward the quiet courtyard, hoping to escape before anyone could ask another painful question. Her bouquet slipped from her trembling fingers onto the stone walkway, scattering white roses across the ground. She stared at them for a long moment, unable to gather the strength to pick them up. A few guests emerged from the church entrance, whispering among themselves. Some expressed sympathy, while others repeated careless speculation about why the groom had walked away. Every sentence reached Emily's ears, even though none of them had been spoken directly to her. She closed her eyes, fighting back tears that refused to remain hidden. After several deep breaths, she bent down and quietly gathered the fallen flowers one by one, determined not to let heartbreak take away the last piece of dignity she still possessed. Inside the church, Nathan remained surrounded by relatives offering awkward reassurance. No one followed Emily immediately. Many believed she simply needed time alone. Near the final row of pews, Vincent DeLuca calmly thanked the minister before walking outside at an unhurried pace. He did not call Emily's name. He did not rush toward her. Instead, he stopped several yards away, making certain she never felt cornered or pressured. He simply waited until she noticed another quiet presence in the courtyard. Emily looked up, surprised to see the unfamiliar man standing respectfully at a distance. Before she could apologize for the uncomfortable scene he had witnessed, Vincent gently told her that she did not owe anyone an apology. His calm voice carried no pity, only quiet certainty. Emily attempted a small smile, admitting that today had not unfolded the way she imagined for countless months. Vincent answered that some moments reveal who people truly are, even when those moments arrive in the most painful ways. Emily looked toward the church doors and confessed that what hurt most was not the broken wedding itself, but realizing how quickly strangers had decided her worth based upon a single public humiliation. Vincent listened without interrupting. When she finished speaking, he simply offered her a clean handkerchief and asked whether she would like a few minutes before deciding where to go next. There was no pressure hidden inside the question, only genuine respect for her choice. Emily accepted the handkerchief with grateful eyes, quietly thanking him for treating her like a person instead of a spectacle. At that moment, several photographers noticed the dignified exchange from across the street, but Vincent's security team politely redirected them away before they could intrude further. Emily barely noticed. For the first time since the ceremony had collapsed, someone had protected her privacy instead of feeding public curiosity. She took one slow breath after another until the trembling in her hands gradually faded. Looking toward the quiet city streets stretching beyond the church gates, she realized that although the future she had planned was gone, the day itself was not over. Standing nearby, Vincent understood that healing could never begin with grand promises or dramatic gestures. It always began with one simple decision to let another human being keep their dignity when the rest of the world had almost forgotten to do the same. The afternoon sun slowly drifted lower above Manhattan as Emily Carter and Vincent DeLuca left the church courtyard behind, walking without urgency through quiet streets lined with turning autumn leaves. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The silence between them never felt uncomfortable because Vincent understood that some wounds deserved space before words. Eventually, they reached a small neighborhood cafe tucked between an old bookstore and a flower shop, a place where soft piano music blended gently with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm cinnamon pastries. Vincent held the door open without ceremony, allowing Emily to enter first before choosing a table beside the window where passing strangers could not easily recognize her. The waitress greeted them with a kind smile, unaware of everything that had happened less than an hour earlier. Emily quietly thanked her, grateful to experience an ordinary conversation after the emotional weight of the abandoned ceremony. Vincent ordered coffee for himself and invited Emily to choose whatever she preferred without mentioning the cost. She selected a simple cup of hot chocolate instead, admitting with an embarrassed smile that it had always been her comfort drink since childhood. Vincent smiled gently and remarked that sometimes the smallest comforts carried the greatest memories. Emily laughed softly for the first time that day. The sound surprised even her. As steam slowly rose from their cups, Vincent made no attempt to ask about the wedding or the groom. Instead, he asked what Emily enjoyed doing when she was happiest. The unexpected question caught her off guard. After thinking quietly for a moment, she admitted that she loved baking. She described waking before sunrise to experiment with new recipes, decorating cakes for neighborhood children, and watching people smile after tasting something she had made with care. Her eyes brightened naturally while she spoke, and Vincent noticed how different she looked whenever she forgot to think about herself through the opinions of others. He listened without interrupting, genuinely interested in every detail. Eventually, Emily apologized for talking so much, but Vincent calmly shook his head and told her that people rarely apologized for speaking about something that made them truly happy. His words settled warmly in her heart because they carried no judgment, only sincere encouragement. After another quiet pause, Emily finally asked why he had stayed after everyone else had begun leaving the church. Vincent looked toward the busy sidewalk outside before answering honestly. He explained that many years earlier, someone he deeply respected had taught him that the easiest moments to recognize character were often the hardest days of another person's life. Walking away without offering basic human kindness had never felt acceptable to him. Emily lowered her eyes, touched by the quiet simplicity of his answer. She confessed that she had spent years believing confidence would come after changing herself enough to satisfy everyone else. Vincent replied that people who required someone to become smaller before offering respect rarely deserved to decide another person's value. Those words lingered between them. Long after the conversation paused again, outside the cafe window, the city continued moving with its usual hurried rhythm. Yet inside that quiet corner, Emily felt something she had almost forgotten existed. For the first time since standing before the altar, she no longer felt like the center of public embarrassment. She simply felt like herself. Vincent noticed the tension slowly leaving her shoulders and understood that healing never arrived through dramatic promises. It began with quiet conversations where a broken heart finally discovered it was safe enough to breathe again. The afternoon gradually faded into early evening as Emily Carter and Vincent DeLuca stepped out of the neighborhood cafe and continued walking through quiet Manhattan streets illuminated by the warm glow of storefront windows. The city moved around them with its usual rhythm, yet Emily no longer felt trapped beneath the weight of curious eyes. For the first time that day, strangers passed without recognizing her as the bride whose wedding had collapsed only hours earlier. She inhaled the crisp autumn air and quietly admitted that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to walk without wondering who might be judging her. Vincent glanced toward the skyline before answering that most people spent far too much energy imagining opinions that would disappear by tomorrow morning, while the opinions they carried about themselves often remained for years. Emily reflected on those words as they reached a small public park overlooking the Hudson River. Golden leaves drifted across the walking path, while families enjoyed the peaceful evening together. Children laughed near a fountain, older couples sat on benches watching the sunset, and joggers followed the riverside trail without noticing the emotional journey unfolding only a few steps away. Vincent suggested they sit for a while, allowing the quiet surroundings to replace the painful memories still echoing inside Emily's heart. She accepted with a grateful smile. After several peaceful minutes, Emily finally spoke about something she had never shared with anyone outside her family. Since childhood, she had often believed she needed to earn acceptance by becoming someone different. Every magazine cover, every careless joke, and every comparison slowly convinced her that confidence belonged only to people who looked a certain way. Even after Nathan proposed, part of her continued believing that one day he might realize she was not enough. Vincent listened carefully without interrupting. When she finished speaking, he remained silent for a brief moment before telling her about his own mother. He explained that she had raised him with one lesson repeated throughout his childhood. She often said that the world would always find reasons to measure people, but character could never be measured by appearance, popularity, or success. The only measurement that truly lasted was how someone treated another person when there was nothing to gain. Emily listened closely, sensing that those words had shaped the calm confidence Vincent carried so naturally. She asked whether his mother still lived nearby. Vincent smiled softly and replied that she did, adding that she remained the wisest person he had ever known. Emily admitted she would like to meet someone capable of raising a son who valued respect more than pride. Vincent answered that perhaps one day she would. The conversation felt remarkably ordinary, yet that ordinary feeling became its greatest comfort. Neither of them discussed romance, promises, or the future. Instead, they spoke about favorite books, family traditions, childhood memories, and the simple happiness found in baking fresh bread on cold Sunday mornings. Emily noticed how naturally the hours passed whenever she stopped worrying about impressing someone. Vincent noticed something equally meaningful. Every time Emily laughed sincerely, she looked less like a woman recovering from humiliation and more like the confident person she had been before years of unnecessary self-doubt. As evening lights reflected across the calm river, Emily quietly thanked Vincent for giving her something far more valuable than sympathy. He had given her the rare experience of being fully heard without being judged. Vincent simply replied that every person deserved at least one place where they never had to apologize for being themselves. Emily looked toward the shimmering water, feeling the truth of those words settle gently into her heart. She realized that although the day had begun with unimaginable disappointment, it had also introduced her to the first person who had looked beyond appearances and recognized her dignity before anything else. The following morning arrived beneath a pale autumn sky that washed Manhattan in soft golden light. Yet Emily Carter still woke expecting to discover that the previous day had been nothing more than a painful dream. The carefully folded wedding dress rested across a chair in her apartment, reminding her that reality could not be undone by sleep. She stood quietly beside her kitchen window holding a warm cup of coffee, watching the city slowly come alive beneath drifting leaves. Her phone remained unusually silent until one message finally appeared from an unfamiliar number. It simply asked whether she had returned home safely. There was no pressure to respond, no invitation, and no unnecessary explanation. Emily immediately recognized the quiet courtesy that had become familiar during yesterday's conversations. She smiled before replying that she was home and doing much better than she had expected. Vincent DeLuca answered only a few moments later, saying he was glad to hear it and wishing her a peaceful day. Nothing more. Emily found herself unexpectedly comforted by the simplicity of the exchange. Later that afternoon, while delivering homemade pastries to a neighborhood charity that supported senior citizens, Emily was greeted warmly by volunteers who had known her family for years. Baking had always been her way of expressing kindness, even during seasons when she struggled to believe in herself. As she arranged fresh cinnamon rolls and apple muffins across serving trays, one elderly volunteer quietly complimented her baking and remarked that food prepared with genuine care always tasted different. Emily thanked her with modest embarrassment, unaware that another familiar visitor had just entered the community center carrying several boxes of donated groceries. Vincent greeted the volunteers by name before setting the supplies on a nearby table and immediately helping organize the afternoon meal. Emily watched with quiet surprise. Until that moment, she had assumed he lived in an entirely different world from ordinary neighborhood service projects. Seeing him comfortably stacking chairs, carrying heavy boxes, and laughing gently with elderly guests challenged every assumption she had formed. During a short break, Emily asked how often he volunteered there. Vincent admitted that his mother had introduced him to the organization many years earlier and reminded him that success meant very little if it never improved someone else's life. Emily listened thoughtfully, realizing that every conversation seemed to reveal another layer of quiet character rather than public reputation. Before she could ask another question, two business associates entered the community center searching for Vincent. They respectfully greeted him as Mr. DeLuca and briefly discussed an upcoming meeting. Emily noticed how naturally everyone deferred to him without him ever requesting special treatment. Once the visitors departed, one volunteer smiled knowingly and explained that Vincent rarely mentioned his business because he preferred letting people judge him by his actions instead of his accomplishments. Curious, Emily later searched his name after returning home. Newspaper articles described him as a remarkably successful businessman with extensive investments, charitable foundations, and an influence that reached far beyond New York. Public rumors occasionally attached the title of Mafia Boss to his family because of generations of complicated history, yet every verified report emphasized his commitment to legitimate enterprises and community service. Emily slowly set her phone aside, surprised that someone with such extraordinary influence had spent the previous day listening to her fears inside a quiet neighborhood cafe without mentioning any of it. The realization humbled her even more than his success itself. He had never tried to impress her with status, wealth, or reputation. Instead, he had offered the one gift she needed most when her world collapsed. He had treated her with unwavering respect before expecting anything in return. As evening settled outside her apartment window, Emily understood that genuine character often revealed itself most clearly through the things people never felt the need to announce about themselves. Several days passed before Emily Carter unexpectedly crossed paths with Nathan Brooks again. She had just finished delivering fresh bread and homemade cookies to the neighborhood community center when she noticed him standing near the entrance, his expression weighed down by visible regret. The confidence he once carried had disappeared, replaced by uncertainty that seemed almost unfamiliar. Emily paused only briefly before greeting him with quiet courtesy. She no longer felt the overwhelming sadness that had followed her after the wedding. Instead, she felt calm, as though the painful chapter had already begun fading into the past. Nathan apologized sincerely for the way everything had unfolded inside the church. He admitted that fear of public opinion had influenced decisions he should have made with honesty months earlier. He confessed that instead of confronting his own uncertainty, he had allowed Emily to carry humiliation she had never deserved. Emily listened patiently without interrupting. When he finished, she quietly thanked him for finally telling the truth, explaining that honesty, even when painful, would always be kinder than false promises. Nathan hesitated before asking whether there was any possibility they could begin again. Emily lowered her eyes thoughtfully, not because she felt tempted, but because she respected the seriousness of the question. Before she could answer, Vincent DeLuca approached from the parking area after helping volunteers unload several boxes of donated food. He greeted Nathan with calm professionalism before turning toward Emily. Vincent immediately sensed the uncomfortable situation, yet made no attempt to control it. Instead, he simply asked whether everything was all right. Emily nodded gently and explained that Nathan wished to speak with her privately. Vincent answered with complete respect, saying that the decision belonged entirely to her. He quietly added that whatever choice brought her genuine peace would always be the correct one. Without another word, he stepped several yards away, giving both of them the privacy they deserved. Emily watched Vincent walk toward the volunteers before looking back at Nathan. In that simple moment, she recognized the profound difference between the two men standing before her. One had once asked her to become someone different before believing she deserved love. The other had never asked her to change at all. Nathan continued apologizing, promising that he could become a better man if she would only give him another opportunity. Emily smiled kindly, but there was no bitterness remaining inside her voice. She explained that forgiveness and reconciliation were not always the same thing. She genuinely forgave him because carrying resentment would only continue hurting herself, but forgiveness did not erase what both of them had learned. Sometimes the healthiest decision was allowing two people to continue growing along separate paths. Nathan quietly lowered his head, understanding that her answer came not from anger, but from healing. He thanked her for listening before wishing her happiness with complete sincerity. As he walked away, Emily felt an unexpected sense of freedom. She realized she no longer needed anyone else's approval to believe in her own worth. Vincent returned only after Nathan had disappeared from view. He did not ask what had been said. Instead, he simply noticed the peaceful expression replacing the sadness that had once filled Emily's eyes. She smiled warmly and admitted that for the first time in many years, she felt as though she had finally chosen herself instead of living according to someone else's expectations. Vincent returned the smile and quietly replied that the strongest decisions were often the ones made without anger, because they were guided by wisdom rather than pain. As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the community center courtyard, Emily understood that healing was no longer something waiting in her future. It had already begun the moment she discovered that genuine respect never asks another person to earn the dignity they already possess. The weeks that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm Emily Carter had not experienced in years. Instead of measuring each morning by disappointment, she began measuring it by the simple joy of creating something meaningful. Before sunrise, the warm scent of fresh bread and cinnamon drifted through her apartment as she tested family recipes that had been carefully preserved inside a worn recipe notebook passed down from her grandmother. Baking had once been a private escape whenever life became overwhelming. Now it slowly became the foundation upon which she rebuilt her confidence. Every Saturday, Emily arrived at the neighborhood community center carrying trays filled with homemade pastries for senior citizens who gathered for breakfast and conversation. She quickly discovered that many of them came for companionship as much as they came for the food itself. She learned their favorite desserts, remembered birthdays, and listened patiently as they shared stories of families, military service, lifelong marriages, and dreams that had survived decades of changing seasons. Every smile she received reminded her that kindness often multiplied without anyone noticing the exact moment it began. Vincent DeLuca continued volunteering there as naturally as before. Although his responsibilities required frequent business meetings throughout New York, he rarely missed an opportunity to help organize deliveries, arrange tables, or spend time speaking with the elderly guests. Emily noticed that regardless of where he went or whom he met, he treated every person with the same calm respect. Volunteers, delivery drivers, business executives, and retirees all received the same steady attention from him. It was impossible to tell from his behavior who possessed influence and who did not, because Vincent never adjusted his character according to another person's status. One quiet afternoon after serving lunch together, Emily and Vincent remained behind to clean the dining hall while the last guest slowly departed. As they folded chairs and stacked empty trays, Emily admitted that volunteering had changed her understanding of happiness. She explained that she had spent years believing confidence would arrive after earning approval from other people, yet genuine peace had begun only after she stopped chasing acceptance altogether. Vincent listened thoughtfully before replying that real confidence rarely appeared through compliments. It grew whenever actions became stronger than fear. Emily smiled, realizing that his words described exactly what she had been experiencing without knowing how to express it. During the following weeks, they often worked side by side without feeling any need to fill every silence with conversation. Sometimes they discussed favorite books or childhood memories. Other times they simply prepared meals together while soft music played through the community center kitchen. The absence of pressure allowed trust to develop naturally. Neither of them spoke about romance. Neither of them hurried toward expectations. Instead, they built something far more enduring through patience, consistency, and mutual respect. Eleanor DeLuca occasionally visited the center as well, immediately recognizing the quiet understanding growing between them. Watching Emily laugh freely while decorating birthday cupcakes for several elderly guests reminded Eleanor of something she had always believed. Lasting relationships never began with grand declarations. They began with two people consistently choosing kindness, even when no audience was watching. As the afternoon sunlight filled the dining hall with warm golden light, Emily looked around at the smiling volunteers, grateful seniors, and peaceful atmosphere surrounding her. It suddenly became clear that the painful day outside the church had not been the end of her story. It had quietly become the beginning of a life where she no longer searched for someone to prove her worth because she had finally learned to recognize that worth within herself. And from that place of quiet confidence, every meaningful connection that followed felt honest, unforced, and wonderfully real. Autumn quietly gave way to the first days of winter, and with every passing week, Emily Carter discovered that the confidence she had once searched for in mirrors had quietly taken root inside ordinary moments. Her apartment kitchen had become a place of creativity instead of self-doubt. Every morning before dawn, warm light spilled across flour-covered countertops as fresh loaves of bread slowly rose beside cooling pies and carefully decorated cakes. Encouraged by friends from the community center, Emily accepted custom orders from neighborhood families, and before long her calendar filled with birthdays, anniversaries, and holiday gatherings. Each recipe carried the same care she had always given freely to others. Yet now every satisfied customer reminded her that talent, kindness, and dedication had never depended upon fitting someone else's definition of beauty. Vincent DeLuca watched her quiet transformation with genuine admiration. Whenever his schedule allowed, he stopped by the community center to help deliver supplies or volunteered at neighborhood events, often arriving early enough to carry heavy boxes before anyone noticed. He never treated Emily as someone who needed rescuing. Instead, he respected the capable, compassionate woman she had always been, allowing her achievements to belong entirely to her. One snowy Saturday afternoon, the volunteers organized a holiday celebration for senior citizens who would otherwise spend the season alone. The community hall filled with laughter, handmade decorations, and the comforting aroma of roasted turkey, cinnamon cookies, and fresh bread. Emily spent hours teaching several grandchildren how to decorate sugar cookies while their grandparents shared stories beside the fireplace. Vincent quietly helped assemble bicycles donated for local children before joining a group of elderly veterans who invited him to play cards. Looking around the room, Emily realized something remarkable. Every face reflected warmth created not by expensive gifts or impressive accomplishments, but by people choosing to give one another their time. Later that evening, after the final guests had returned home with full hearts and carefully wrapped leftovers, Emily and Vincent stepped outside into softly falling snow. The busy city seemed unusually peaceful beneath glowing streetlights. They walked side by side without speaking for several minutes, listening only to the gentle sound of snowflakes settling across sidewalks and rooftops. Eventually, Emily admitted that 1 year earlier, she would never have imagined feeling grateful for the day her wedding had ended. At the time, it had seemed like the greatest loss of her life. Now she understood that it had quietly redirected her toward a future she never would have discovered otherwise. Vincent smiled thoughtfully before telling her that painful endings often revealed opportunities impossible to recognize while they were still unfolding. Emily looked at him with calm certainty and thanked him for never trying to decide her future on her behalf. She explained that his greatest gift had not been protection or influence. It had been the freedom to heal at her own pace, while knowing someone genuinely believed in her. Vincent answered that respect had always been the strongest foundation any relationship could possess, because trust built slowly lasted far longer than admiration built quickly. Their eyes met for only a quiet moment before they continued walking through the softly falling snow. Nothing needed to be promised. Nothing needed to be hurried. The friendship they had patiently nurtured through honesty, compassion, and shared purpose had already grown into something deeper than either of them had expected. For the first time since that heartbreaking afternoon inside the church, Emily looked toward the future without fear, knowing that whatever tomorrow might bring, she would never again measure her worth through the acceptance of someone unable to recognize the extraordinary strength she had carried within herself all along. 1 year later, the first warm morning of spring welcomed the neighborhood with blooming cherry trees and gentle sunlight stretching across the sidewalks of Manhattan. Emily Carter unlocked the front door of a small bakery that proudly carried her grandmother's family name above the entrance. Fresh bread filled the air with a comforting aroma before the first customers even arrived, while baskets of warm pastries lined the display shelves beside handwritten notes thanking every visitor for supporting local charities through each purchase. The bakery had become more than a business. It had quietly become a gathering place where neighbors shared stories, celebrated milestones, and discovered that kindness often tasted as memorable as the food itself. Every Saturday afternoon, Emily continued preparing complimentary meals and desserts for the community center that had helped restore her confidence when she needed it most. Nothing about her generosity had changed because success had never become the reason she served others. It simply allowed her to help even more people than before. Vincent DeLuca arrived carrying several boxes of fresh fruit donated by local farms that partnered with the community kitchen. He greeted every employee by name before helping arrange supplies exactly as he always had, never asking anyone to acknowledge his influence or accomplishments. Over the past year, the friendship between Emily and Vincent had quietly grown into something built upon unwavering trust, mutual admiration, and countless ordinary moments shared without expectation. Neither of them had rushed toward promises because they understood that the strongest relationships developed naturally when respect came before affection. Later that afternoon, the community center celebrated its annual neighborhood appreciation gathering. Families, volunteers, senior citizens, and local business owners filled the hall with laughter that echoed through every corner of the building. Eleanor DeLuca watched proudly as children decorated cookies beside grandparents who had once arrived feeling completely alone. Looking around the room, she realized that one painful afternoon outside a church had eventually connected hundreds of lives that otherwise might never have crossed paths. Before the celebration concluded, Vincent quietly invited Emily to step outside into the peaceful garden behind the community center. Spring flowers surrounded a simple stone pathway where birds sang from nearby trees, creating a calm silence untouched by the busy city beyond the gates. Vincent looked at Emily with the same quiet respect she had first noticed on the most difficult day of her life. He told her that long before he admired her courage, he admired her compassion. Long before he appreciated her strength, he appreciated her kindness. Every day they had spent serving others together had only confirmed what he already believed. Emily had never needed someone to complete her life because she had already become the remarkable woman she was meant to be. He simply hoped she might allow him to continue walking beside her through whatever future they chose to build together. Emily felt tears gather gently in her eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. She answered that the greatest gift he had ever given her was never protection, wealth, or influence. It was the freedom to rediscover herself without pressure or fear. She smiled warmly before placing her hand in his, and quietly accepted the future they would create together. As they returned to the celebration, surrounded by friends whose lives had become forever intertwined through simple acts of compassion, Emily glanced toward the bright afternoon sky and remembered the silence that had once filled another ceremony long ago. This time there was no humiliation waiting at the end of the aisle, no whispered judgment, and no uncertainty about her worth. There were only grateful hearts, enduring respect, and a love patiently built upon dignity from the very beginning. And on that beautiful spring afternoon, everyone present was reminded that the right person will never ask you to become someone else before choosing to stand beside you.